60 million Americans tried to trace their family history online. They sent in DNA samples, uploaded old birth records, paid monthly fees to platforms that promised to reconnect them with their past. And almost all of them ran into the same problem. Not 1776, not 1620, but 1870. That's where the trail ends. That's where the names disappear. That's where your family tree turns into a collection of blanks. I spent 3 months trying to understand why, and what I found changed the way I see history entirely. Because this isn't just missing paperwork, it's a pattern. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. So let's start with the obvious question. Why 1870? If you dig into genealogy forums, you'll find answers that sound reasonable at first. Birth certificates weren't required until the early 1900s. The 1890 census was destroyed in a fire. Records just weren't kept very well back then. Most people accept that. I did too, for about a week. Then I started looking closer. And the details don't line up. Take the 1890 census. At the time, it was the most detailed population record ever created in the United States. Nearly 63 million people documented with information no previous census had ever captured. Not just names and ages, immigration status, naturalization records. How many children someone had, and how many survived. Whether they spoke English, whether they owned property or rented, whether they had fought in the Civil War, and on which side. This wasn't just a count. It was a snapshot of an entire nation during a very specific moment in time, a generation that still remembered what came before. Then, on January 10th, 1921, a fire broke out in the basement of the Commerce Building in Washington, D.C., where these records were stored. The official story says about a quarter of the census was destroyed immediately. Another half was damaged by water and smoke. But that's not the full story, because the fire didn't actually erase the census. What happened next did. The damaged records sat in storage for 12 years. No restoration, no effort to copy or recover them. Nothing. Then in December 1932, the chief clerk of the Census Bureau sent a list to the Librarian of Congress. It was a list of documents marked for destruction. The 1890 census was on it. The librarian reviewed it and decided that not a single page was worth saving. Not one. Out of 63 million names. Congress approved the destruction on February 21st, 1933. And here's the part that's hard to ignore. The very next day, February 22nd, President Herbert Hoover laid the cornerstone for the National Archives building, a fireproof facility designed specifically to protect records like these. One day apart. The census was destroyed on the 21st. The building that could have saved it began construction on the 22nd. Out of 63 million records, only about 6,000 survived. That's not just an accident. That's something else. And the census is only one piece of this puzzle. Let's look at another. Before the 1900s, most American states didn't require birth certificates at all. Massachusetts started keeping them in 1841. But South Carolina didn't require birth registration until 1915. Georgia waited until 1919. Texas began in 1903. But even then, compliance was inconsistent for decades. So when Social Security was introduced in 1935, millions of Americans suddenly had a problem. They couldn't prove they were born. No documents, no official record that they even existed. To fix this, people had to apply for something called a delayed birth certificate. They had to gather whatever evidence they could find. Old census entries, church baptism records, notes in family Bibles, even testimonies from elderly relatives. Anything that could confirm they were real. Think about that for a second. An entire generation being asked to prove their own existence. Your great-great-grandmother, born in 1880. There's a good chance she never had a birth certificate. The only proof she lived might be a handwritten note in a family Bible. And that's only if that Bible survived, if it wasn't lost, or sold, or destroyed. Because as it turns out, fires have a way of following these records. And that leads to something genealogists call burned counties. Burned counties is the term researchers use for places where courthouse fires wiped out official records. At first, that sounds like bad luck. Old buildings, wood construction, oil lamps, accidents happen. Except, the numbers don't look random at all. Around 40% of counties in Alabama lost their records, 40% in Georgia, nearly 40% in Mississippi. And in Tennessee, 60 out of 95 counties experienced major record destruction. That's not occasional, that's widespread. And it gets stranger. Some of these courthouses didn't just burn once, they burned multiple times. Lenoir County, North Carolina, lost records in 1878, and then again in 1880. Montgomery County burned in 1835, 1840, and 1886. Swain County lost everything in 1879. Then in 1908, during a riot, a mob burned the courthouse again. Nothing was saved. In Port Tobacco, Maryland, a fire in 1895 destroyed the courthouse completely. Contemporary reports called it suspicious. The town never recovered. It lost its status as a county seat and slowly faded into obscurity. These weren't just random buildings going up in flames. These were the exact places where records were stored. Birth certificates, death records, marriage licenses, land deeds, probate files. Everything that proves who you are, who your family was, and where you came from. Gone. One researcher described it as paper genocide, because what disappeared weren't just documents. It was evidence. Evidence of Native American land ownership. Evidence of mixed-race ancestry. Evidence of property claims that didn't match official narratives. In some cases, witnesses even reported seeing courthouse employees removing documents before the fires started. Records that didn't burn. Records that were taken. And today, some of those documents are believed to sit in private collections, locked away, inaccessible to the very descendants who need them. But even that isn't the full picture. To really understand the wall at 1870, you have to look at what changed in that exact year. Because suddenly, 4 million new people appeared in American records. 4 million formerly enslaved individuals. Before 1870, enslaved people weren't listed by name in federal census records. They were counted, but not identified. In the 1850 and 1860 censuses, there were separate documents called slave schedules. These listed human beings as property, a number, an age, a gender, but no names, no families, no identities, just inventory. Then came 1870, the first census after emancipation, and everything changed overnight. 4 million people now needed names. Some took the surnames of former enslavers. Others chose their own. Names like Freeman, Justice, Liberty, Hope. Names that didn't reflect what they had been, but what they had become. But this created a new problem, because the same family could appear under different names from one record to the next. A man might use one surname in the census, and another in church records. Children might take their mother's name, while the father used something completely different. It wasn't inconsistency, it was survival. But for anyone trying to trace ancestry later, it becomes a maze. An entire population whose recorded history begins at the same moment. with the same confusion, running into the same wall. And they weren't the only ones. If your ancestors came to America before 1820, there's a good chance there's no record of their arrival at all, because the federal government didn't require passenger lists until the Steerage Act of 1819, which went into effect in 1820. Before that, immigration records were handled by individual ports, and most of those records were incomplete or never existed. About 80% of white immigrants before 1790 came from British territories. They weren't tracked. They weren't documented. They just arrived. The National Archives says this plainly. There are no passenger lists for ships arriving before 1820, with only a few rare exceptions. Millions of people who built the country left no official trace of how they got there. So when you step back and look at all of this together, a pattern starts to form. Before 1870, enslaved Americans had no names in federal records. Before 1820, most immigrants had no documented arrival. Before 1900, most Americans didn't have birth certificates. The 1890 census, the one that captured a critical transition generation in extraordinary detail, was lost through a combination of fire, neglect, and deliberate destruction. And local courthouse fires wiped out records across huge portions of the country. Every single type of document that could connect people to their pre-1870 ancestry is either missing, incomplete, or never existed at all. So the question becomes, what's left? And more importantly, who controls it? Because what remains isn't scattered randomly, it's concentrated. The largest genealogical database in the world isn't run by a government. It's operated by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Through an organization called Family Search, they maintain something known as the Granite Mountain Records Vault in Utah. It's built into solid rock, climate-controlled, earthquake-resistant, designed to survive catastrophe, even nuclear fallout. Inside are more than 2 billion names stored on microfilm. Think about that. The most comprehensive archive of human ancestry on Earth sits inside a mountain, owned by a religious organization. Why? The answer comes down to a doctrine called baptism for the dead. Members of the church trace family lines so they can perform proxy baptisms on deceased relatives, offering them membership in the faith after death. That means many of these records exist primarily for a purpose you never agreed to, and that has caused controversy for decades. In 2008, the Vatican instructed Catholic parishes worldwide to stop sharing records with Mormon genealogists. Back in 1995, Jewish organizations reached an agreement with the church after discovering that hundreds of thousands of Holocaust victims had been baptized without family consent. But the issue hasn't gone away. Names continue to appear in temple records. Anne Frank, Holocaust survivors, public figures, politicians. The database keeps growing. And then there's Ancestry, the platform millions of Americans use to build their family trees. It was founded by graduates of Brigham Young University, built on digitized LDS records. Today, it's owned by the Blackstone Group, a private equity firm that bought it for $4.7 billion. Church members get free access, and according to researchers at Harvard, users can send relatives they find on Ancestry directly into the church's system for proxy baptism with just a click. So you pay to discover your ancestors, and someone else may be using them for religious rituals. The more I looked into this, the more one question kept coming back. We're told that record-keeping before 1870 was just incomplete, that governments didn't prioritize documentation, that fires happened, that records were lost through ordinary circumstances. But the pattern suggests something more deliberate. Every census from 1790 through 1880 had backup copies stored locally. at state and county levels. Redundancy, protection. But the 1890 census was different. For the first time, everything was centralized. One location, one basement in Washington, one fire. Then 12 years of inaction. Then one decision to destroy what remained. And one final detail that's hard to ignore. The authorization to destroy it came just one day before construction began on a fireproof archive that could have preserved it. Maybe that's coincidence. Maybe reducing 63 million names to just 6,000 is just incompetence. Maybe nearly half of Southern courthouses burning is random chance. Maybe the fact that every document type linking Americans to their pre-1870 past has been erased, damaged, or never recorded is just how history works. Messy, incomplete, unfortunate. But I don't think you believe that anymore. Because once you see the pattern, it stays with you. And it leads to a much harder question. If someone wanted to disconnect an entire population from its past, if they wanted to make sure people couldn't trace their origins beyond a certain point, if they wanted to build a wall that looked accidental instead of intentional, what would that look like? Would it look any different from this? The surviving records, stored in a fortified vault controlled by a religious institution. The largest public database built on those same archives. A census that captured a critical generation, destroyed through a mix of fire, neglect, and authorization. Local records erased in fires that researchers have called suspicious for over a century. And a population left trying to piece together its history from fragments. Your family story didn't begin in 1870. That's just where the paper trail stops. Everything before that, you have to find another way. The stories your grandmother told, the names she remembered, the places she described, places that don't quite match what history books say. Those are records too. Older than any census, harder to destroy, impossible to officially erase. Someone is still carrying those stories. The question is, will anyone write them down before that generation is gone? And when they do, will the next generation believe them when every official record says otherwise?